Hey, Natalie.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
I'm well. Welcome to the Lift Oneself podcast, where we break mental health stigmas through conversations. I'm your host, Nat, and we dive into topics about trauma and how it impacts the nervous system. Yet we don't just leave you there. We share insights and tools of self-care, meditation, and growth that help you be curious about your own biology. Your presence matters. Please like and subscribe to our podcast. Help our community grow. Let's get into this. Oh, and please remember to be kind to yourself. Welcome to the Lift Oneself podcast, Gabrielle. I am so thankful you're here with me.
It's great to be here, Natalie. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Before we start our conversation and to transition into this space, would you come into a meditation with me?
I'd gladly do that, yes.
And for the listeners, many listen to a podcast through their car or exercise or activity. So for the visual part, I'll ask you to keep your eyes open because I want you and everybody around you to stay safe. Yet the other prompts, you're able to follow along with whatever activities you're doing. So Gabrielle, Gabriel, ask you if you could find a comfortable position and close your eyes and begin breathing in and out through your nose. And bring your awareness to watching your breath go in and out through your nose. Don't try to control your breath. Just watch how it goes in and out, becoming aware of your inner state. There may be some sensations or feelings coming up in the body. You're safe to feel them. You're safe to release them, while still staying focused with your breath. Surrender the need to control. Release the need to resist and just be. Be with your breath. Drop into your body. Keep your awareness on your breath. While still staying with your breath, Gabrielle, I'll ask you in your mind to create an intention you want to bring forth in this conversation and for the listeners. And when you've created that intention, I'll ask you to release it into your thoughts, into your nervous system, down through your throat and voice, down into your heart, down into your stomach, into your life force, into your energetic field. While still staying with your breath, allowing that intention to grow and surround you. Continue keeping your awareness on your breath. Keeping your awareness on the breath. I want you to come back into your senses. And when you're ready, you're going to gently open your eyes while still staying with your breath. How's your heart doing?
It's interesting you ask that because my intention that I set was to come from a heart-centered place. So that's wonderful. My heart's open and I am looking forward to the conversation.
Can you let the listeners know who Gabrielle is?
Well, I am a kind of a composite of someone who is deeply passionate about psychology and deeply passionate about spirituality. And in the last few years, I've allowed both of those two passions to come merge. And my practice is now working through contemporary psychological challenges in a spiritual framework. So that's the lens with which I view myself. I've been a seeker of truth ever since I was a young child. Age 7 or 8, I started capturing my dreams and trying to make sense of some really wild and crazy dreams, started journaling really regularly. And then after my father passed away, when I was about 10 years old, I said to my mum, I want to go and see a medium. And she said no. So the spirituality was kind of put on the back burner, even though I had intermittent spiritual experiences. And I pursued a career in organizational psychology. And 5 years ago, I skilled up I had a kind of a catalyst and inflection point, and I landed up studying energy, and I did 18 months of it, 3 levels, and now I bring that modality in to help people really let go of deep blocks, deep traumas, and release and move forward in their life. So that's, I guess, me in a snapshot.
Nice, beautiful. Thank you for that. Were you able to go seek a medium afterwards in your teens or in your 20s?
Oh, yeah, I did. I saw a couple of mediums, both were exceptional. The second medium that I went to see was on the recommendation of a friend of mine, and I sat down with her. She took hold of my hand, she kind of tuned in, and she tuned straight into my late father. She started speaking about a middle-aged, graying gentleman coming through who was highly esteemed, which was very much, my father was a well-renowned, like world-renowned doctor, professor of medicine. And she said he wanted me to know that when my brother was in the accident that he had and was very close to death, my father brought him back. And my eldest brother, for 2 older brothers, my eldest brother had, in fact, years before, been in a very, very serious car accident. He had to be taken out by the jaws of life. And when he was on the operating table, he had a near-death experience. He felt himself sitting up, which of course he didn't do, and surveying and watching what was going on. So that was an extraordinary experience, and one that I hold really dear to me.
It sounds beautiful. And I know some listeners will be open to this and other listeners will be like, what are you talking about? I don't understand. And as I tell people, it's the other side of love. Unfortunately,
Yes.
a lot of people have a wrong relationship with death, a wrong relationship with spirit. And when you can understand the other side of love and understand energy and frequency and expansion in the universe, it's a beautiful experience to go into all these dimensions. Can you explain to the listeners your definition of energy and what that training is and what you are now practicing?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So the way that I see it is energy is our life force. You know, we sometimes know it as prana, chi, and it is the thing that regulates everything, both conscious and unconscious. You know, you think about our heart beating, our breathing, we've just gone through a breathing process. Most of that happens out of our awareness, and it's energy that's, you know, creating that. So I guess the differentiator between when we're alive and when we have passed away, this, you know, this physical form, is whether the chi, the energy, is flowing through us. But it also has a profound effect on our emotional how we feel, our thoughts, our beliefs, the stories we tell ourselves, our identity, our behaviors, actions, decisions, how we show up or not. So it is this, I always describe it as an invisible force. It can either be an accelerator or it can act as an invisible handbrake that keeps you really stuck in life. So that's how I would define it. I know there was a second part to your question, which is about my healing modality and energy. Yes. So, I had been working in the field of psychology for, years, decades. And of course, I was in my own therapy because of the work that I did in talk therapy. And it was an incredibly powerful and enlightening process. I think therapy is, well, for me, was hugely critical for self-awareness, self-understanding. But what happened a number of years ago was I was at another inflection point in my life, and the psychological tools and techniques that I'd learned had actually stopped working. And actually, when I reflected on my life, even though I was filled with self-awareness, I knew my triggers, I knew all my shadow side. My life hadn't changed fundamentally. I was still stuck in the same patterns which were manifest in my life. And when I learned about energy, I realized that all our traumas, whether they happened in childhood, in utero, whether they be passed down from generation to generation, all the traumas that we sit with, actually, they are just energy because they're finished. What's left is the energy that's left behind. And what I learned and have now realized in my own life, that if you are able to find and release the energetic inception point of your trauma, that's where things shift really fast. And so that's what I do. And I use a modality that's based on advanced sacred geometry to help with that.
Okay. Can you let the listeners know what a healing process looks like with energy?
Yes. I actually was talking about this in one of my podcasts yesterday with two really lovely guys, and they kind of, when we debriefed it, they were laughing because they were saying, when the way I describe it, can feel a little bit esoteric. So there's a warning, a disclaimer up front. But basically what I do, most of my clients actually are not based in Australia. They're not even based in Sydney. And even if they are based in Sydney, I prefer to do virtual healings. That's my modality. And the reason is that, if I'm hovering over you and working with your chakra system and kind of clearing out your third eye, whatever it is that I'm doing, you're going to feel that sensation. You're going to be aware of my presence. And I want people to really sink into ultimately a theta state if they can, but into a deep state of relaxation. And I don't want them to be bothered by that. So it's mostly virtual. And what I do is I use, I've got tools and techniques where, we've got a physical body, but we've also got an energetic body. And the energetic body is where our chakras are, meridians, our aura, all those things. And what I do is I'm able to bring the person's energetic body in front of me and house it in a particular structure, geometric structure that keeps it intact. And that's what I work with. So it feels to me as I'm working that the person's standing in front of me. And what I'm doing is, because I've activated my spiritual gifts, and I've learned how to read energy. I'm reading their energy. I work with more than the 7 chakras, but I go through the chakras that I work with, the 7 ones, most of us know about them. And often when I'm in a chakra, I'm clearing, I'm feeling the sensation in my hand. I'm a clairaudience, I'm hearing, getting messages, getting intuitive pings, and I'm knowing where to work, where to really double down. And often, so for argument's sake, say, like I feel something in the person's throat chakra, for argument's sake. That might take me in a variety of directions. I then branch off. I might get a really intuitive sense that it is from childhood. Yeah, so I'll then use geometry that allows me to read across their timeline, go into their childhood and really understand what's happening. I gave this example yesterday, which seemed to land. So I was once working on somebody, and I can't remember which chakra it was, but it took me into there. I did a childhood kind of healing and reading, and I got a very strong visual of this person as a 4 or 5-year-old boy sitting on a dusty road and feeling like self-soothing, feeling like they were, sad, but really trying to soothe themselves. And when I finished and I cleared and I did whatever was, needed, and the person came back, which is always what happens, I bring them back and then we debrief. I spoke about that. I said, this is what I picked up. And they spoke about an incident in their childhood where they ran out of church and kind of went to a place that I described similar to that. And people couldn't find them. They were on their own. They were feeling scared. And then through language and, psychologically, we then spoke about that childhood event. But what I'd done in the healing is I'd found the energetic root. I'd pulled it out. I'd released it. And it was gone, but I felt it was really important for the person, as I always do, to understand what I did and to help them make sense psychologically of what that let go. And then what I do at the end of the session is always give people something pragmatic to walk away with. So depending on what issue we've been working on, I'll give them something to help maintain their energetic state.
Beautiful. What kind of clientele would come and seek you?
Well, actually, because I've got a corporate background, a lot of my clientele have been from the corporate world, and they often come because they're feeling like seriously stressed or anxious. They're feeling, like they need to make a decision, but they don't have the wherewithal to do that. They need that nudge forward. They may be feeling kind of a sense of being an imposter. Senior leaders often talk about feeling very lonely and isolated and disconnected. And so there are all sorts of things that the corporate world presents. Sometimes, working in corporate, it's toxic. The corporate culture can be very draining. A lot of people I see, they don't know it, but they're empaths. So what they're doing is they're absorbing other people's energy. They're absorbing that toxic energy and they feel terrible, but they don't know why. And so I help them really work, to put proper energetic boundaries around themselves so that they're not as affected by the environment. So a lot of it is, from the corporate world, but that's starting to shift. More and more people are coming to me through these kinds of podcasts who some of them have an interest in, somebody's just contacted me. They feel like they've got the gift of mediumship. They want me to activate their spiritual gifts. I do that. Sometimes often people come to me when they're in a transition in life, like big change, because that brings up all sorts of stuff. So I help them navigate that, release what's holding them back, get into a non-resistant state and move through change. So, all sorts of things. So the actual issues themselves are very relatable. And then I bring some of these techniques in and I translate it for my clients so they have a sense of how I'm working with them. I'm always doing that translation piece, which I think is quite important.
It is. Going back to your childhood, with the transition of your father, how did that impact you?
Well, the transition was more than just his passing. The transition, he was sick for about 4 or 5 years. And so and he never spoke about it. So that's the other thing. My dad was a professor of medicine. He got terminally ill. It was a very difficult time for him. And he kept it secret because obviously spoke to my mom, but the children, because we weren't speaking about it, which was not a good thing. But because I was deeply intuitive, I knew something was amiss. And so what actually happened, and this, with many, many traumas, I developed a series of limiting beliefs, I guess, because this thing was happening to me and I didn't know how to process it at such a young age. And so, fear overcame me. I lived for decades with kind of crippling anxiety, grief. It manifested as anger, which was interesting because I couldn't face my grief and anxiety. So I was a rebel when I was a teenager. I was angry. I was, all of that. And, I had some really limiting and crazy beliefs that started to infiltrate my life. For example, because my dad was in the prime of his life when he was diagnosed, I started to, I developed this belief that I can't be successful because if I'm successful, something bad's going to happen to me or I'll pay the ultimate price just like my father did. So, these kinds of traumas have tentacles in all aspects of our life. And we do really need to do the work to understand and release them. And I did a huge amount of work to understand them. I spoke about my father's death ad nauseum in therapy, but as I said, the behavior, like I was still trapped in this invisible prison. And it was the energy healing that helped shift that.
Yeah. Because like I tell my clients, replace trauma with energy. And so there's a charged energy inside your nervous system, and it keeps
Yes.
activating your four F's, your fight, your flight, your freeze, or your fawn. And then that, a lot of people think trauma is the event or what was experienced. And it's like, no, what did you interpret from that? And
Exactly.
humans of pattern. So we're going to make sense. And sometimes what we made as a definition is very illogical. Yet for the nervous system and the defense mechanisms, it feels like this is a way of protecting you. And until
Yes.
you dive into your nervous system to see yourself, see what is going on with your perception, and like you said, your limiting beliefs, then you come to see, oh, the shift of what have I created? And that is
Yes.
something that
Yes.
is very daunting to look at, because no one would want to see that like some of this is my part. Like I've created this,
Yes.
because we have
Yes.
this narrative, it's all outside of you. And then it's like, well, if everything's outside of you, you're disempowered. There's nothing that
Exactly.
you take access to.
Exactly, Natalie. That's exactly it. I mean, there's so much in what you're saying. I just want to double down on that idea of what have I created? And it's a very confronting piece, but it is empowering, as you say. When I work with human transformation, that's the biggest challenge, getting people from knowing they've got a problem to owning it. And so the ownership piece is difficult. But as you say, it's not just empowering, it's quite exhilarating when you have moments of awareness and you feel like a sense of motivation. You feel like you're progressing. You're all motivated by that. So it's an important piece. The other thing you were alluding to is, we've got these illogical things that keep us trapped. And in psychological talk, we refer to those as the payoff. There's a psychological payoff. Why would I remain stuck in anxiety for 4 decades, you'd ask me, when it was awful? And the reason for me, the payoff was, if I worry, if I'm constantly on edge, if I'm hypervigilant, then bad things won't happen to me. So the payoff was a momentary feeling of relief. And it's all unconscious, and it's really funky. So I find it interesting. And part of how I work with my clients is to find the intrigue, the curiosity, and the joy in unraveling the layers of the onion and learning more about ourselves. I think it's a very thrilling process. And most people do.
Yeah. I know, like when I say the nervous system, some people are like, I don't understand that word. It's too complex. It's too big. And I'm like, you're already in your nervous system. To say that you're incapable of understanding it, it's like you're already in a car and it's an autopilot. So once you get to interact with this car, then you're able to maneuver it in the proper way. And when I hear people about trauma and the energy, and I'm like, okay, well, your nervous system is like a wild stallion. It is very powerful. And you don't want to tame a wild stallion. You don't want to take the power away from it. You want to learn how to ride that stallion and be able to guide it and no longer be dragged by the wild stallion, because that's what happens when you're unconscious and you're,
Yes.
these emotions and these the fear hijack your behavior. It's the same thing as kind of being dragged by the nervous system because and unfortunately, our defense mechanisms have been given a bad rap rather than having the compassion of understanding, like you said, it's trying to protect you. It's giving you a payoff. And it's also understanding the chemical dumps that you get with this, like cortisol
Exactly.
and adrenaline. It's great.
Yes.
It gets us like, why do you think sometimes you procrastinate and you do things last minute and all of a sudden you got this charge and you can go, yet you're depleted after. And it takes you a
Yes.
couple of days to get back up or whatnot because you ran your system you revved it all the way up, drained out the tank, and now it's going to take some time to fill it back up. And with the energy and what I'm hearing you say with your energy work, it's like, let's not empty this tank anymore. Let's keep the energy flowing all the time. And then you can
Yes.
even gather it and it can get bigger and bigger in the momentum and really be back attached to your worth, be back attached to the love within you, and let your curiosity be unleashed because that's the only way you will feel safe and secure in uncertainty and the unknown. That's what you really
Yes.
need. And be able
Yes.
to like feel joy, which when you've had
Yes.
grief, it's difficult to connect back into that.
It's frightening. I think the thing that I was most frightened of was feeling joy because I always felt the rug would get pulled out. I become complacent. The rug would get pulled out from under my feet. That metaphor of the wild stallion is one that's going to stay with me because I think it's such a beautiful image. And I often talk about it, similar to what I often talk about. You know, your energy, your emotions can either control you and be in charge, or you can be in charge of them, you know. And so, and when I say in charge, I mean riding that stallion in a way that's kind of flowing, you're in flow with it. And every one of our emotions, Natalie, has got a golden and a shadow side. And we got to look for the golden side, and that's what we got to milk. Even fear, we often think about it. You spoke earlier about the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That's a negative connotation. That feels like we associate fear with being in survival. But actually, fear can be a huge enabler in our life. And, you were talking about spiritual awakening. And I was thinking as you were talking, my spiritual awakening, I was terrified when I started that journey. And it was the terror that enabled me to actually go forward, ironically, because what happened was I was so scared of bumping into negative entities and all of that, creepy stuff, that I put very clear boundaries around my journey. I took baby steps. I was cautious. And what that allowed me to do was lean into the journey without feeling overwhelmed. And ironically, that's what allowed me to go forward. What I learned from that is that fear can be a major enabler. It helps you put the appropriate boundaries around things, manage risk, do all of those things which are important.
Yeah, and work with your biology because if you overwhelm
Yes,
it, it's going to go backwards into a pattern that feels like
yes,
comfort and not go
yes,
into the unknown and uncertainty and discover new
yes,
things. So great.
exactly.
And I always say like anger is healthy and people are like, what? I've never heard that before. What are you talking about? I'm like, you have to befriend your anger. Anger is a very necessary emotion, yet it gets a bad rap because most times, because you don't know how to feel it, you're not able to listen to it, it hijacks the behavior with aggression or shutting
Yes,
down. Where
yes,
it's like, again, that wild stallion, if you want a visual, you're getting dragged by it, where you can
yes,
ride on it. And it's finding ways of letting it have expression and not berating yourself that I shouldn't be feeling this way and I oughtn't to be, and not being able to advocate and use your voice, which will activate a lot of anger also in a person.
yes.
And fear again too is another, like if we didn't have fear in our nervous system, we would be dead. Like that is what activates the nervous system. And the nervous system has one function. Don't let this vessel body die. So anything that
Survival.
comes close to that is going to
Yeah.
activate the fear. Yet, where there's a car, where there's fire, where there's danger, you get these activations that come up to prime you like there's something that physically feels threatening. And if you didn't have
Yes.
fear, you wouldn't know how to create, like you said, the boundaries of, okay, what is this going to look like? I'm taking proactive action to go into
Yes.
this unknown, yet I'm going to tell my biology that these are the parameters, so I won't overwhelm you, and I won't put us in situations that could feel threatening or in danger also.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. Going back to that stallion metaphor, I'm going to milk it for what it's worth. When we're talking about anger, it's useful to differentiate between anger and reactive anger. Reactive anger is the stallion. It's in charge of you. It's running the show. And so anger itself is really, it's also a boundary setting emotion. Reactive anger is where we get tripped up. And I lived in reactive anger for so long, as I said earlier, because it was the secondary emotion. The primary emotion was grief. I was raging. And, why did my wonderful father get taken away from us? What did we do? Well, this is not fair. And so that expressed throughout my life as reactive anger.
Thank you for that. And, I teach because people will be like, what do you mean? Like, the buzzword is to be authentic. And I'm like, okay, well, if you want to be authentic, that means you have to identify what you are actually feeling in your authentic, your first emotion, not your secondary. And people are like, huh? Secondary. And I'm like, most people are running off of secondary emotions. They don't even know how to feel what is truly my emotions. And like you said, for the empaths, they're taking on everybody else's stuff and interpreting everybody else's feelings that they don't even know how to sort out. Like, what is you? Where are you? And what are your feelings? And, for healing, what I remind myself, because I'm always going through it, because there's no arrival with that. Being human is traumatic in itself, especially in the world with social media, being bombarded with so much information. It's recognizing that I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
That sounds very much like me. I'm glad it's happened to somebody else, because that happened to me a few days ago on a podcast.
What was I saying?
No, I've forgotten. Look, I'm menopausal, so I've got an excuse. I've literally forgotten. I was listening, and then what were you saying?
I have no idea. It'll be interesting when
it'll come back. It'll come back.
It'll be what it has to be.
You were talking about empaths at one point, because I took a note, but I think that was previous thought. Empaths, that was your previous thought.
Oh, the secondary emotions, wanting to be authentic. And people don't know how to actually feel what their feelings. Yes, this is what it is. With the healing, what people need to recognize, you have to have radical honesty with yourself. And that can feel brutal.
It can, or it can, yes, it can. And it can elicit shame. I guess that's the risk. And you've got to keep your shame in check, because, like when you have moments where you realize that actually you've been the common denominator in all your upsets in your life, all your patterns. And that is it is very difficult. And so shame is one emotion to really nip in the bud, because that can really go down a downward spiral. And one of the ways that I have dealt with shame myself, because shame thrives in silence. When we feel ashamed, we don't talk about that thing. The best way to get over shame and to, I guess, neutralize its potency is to actually talk about it to somebody who you trust. And I think that's an incredibly powerful gift that we can give ourselves to help us move forward and kind of get through impasses in our life.
Yeah, because shame can bring you in a quicksand that is very difficult to come back out of, and that suicidal ideation and self-loathing can really get really entangled, where it's really difficult to see any light and recognize like you are the light. It's just very dark. And it's again, defense mechanisms trying to protect you. So it's not in a way of shaming the shame, It's
Yes.
recognizing, okay, this is what's happening. And like you said, having that feedback of speaking to somebody where you can have a sacred space of honesty and somebody's not trying to paint it out of you. It's like, okay, this is where it is. Yet, is it true? What are other things that you have to see that you're not allowing the context of everything to be seen? You're
Yes.
just in one
Yes.
little part of it.
Exactly. And that kind of inquiry, like really debunking the truth of the thing that's making you feel shamed, is a really important intervention. But sometimes moving through shame is just as simple as realizing that we all feel shame. You know, I'm not the only one who's sitting and cringing about something in my life. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Often in our lives. So it's a universal experience, and that helps me feel a lot less caught up in it.
Exactly. And it's, sometimes I have to remind myself as well as my clients, it's like, just because you think that you face something and you feel that it's healed or healing, don't be surprised when it comes back and knocks as a visitor. Because then
Yes,
it's like, can you
yes,
interact with me? Are you able to
yes,
sit with me? That's what the shadow work is, where people think,
exactly.
I slayed it and it's gone now. And it's like,
No,
no, it's going to
no,
come back. And it's how can you interact with this?
that's right. And it comes back, for me, my experience has been it comes back in a different form.
Yeah.
When I do the energy healing, and, I release a primary core root of a block. It can certainly come back, but what I found and what my clients have told me is that when it comes back, it's with less, you're not riding the stallion. There I go
Yeah.
again. You're able to now interact with the emotion because it's not as terrifying. Something, the valence, the charge has been released, and now you're able to interact with it in a healthy way and listen to it and honor it and value it and sometimes debunk it at whatever it is, but actually, you've got to get to that point. The first round of talking about it, healing it, gets rid of the overwhelming nature of it. And then when it comes back, you have a different relationship to it for sure.
Yeah, it's that charge. Because when you haven't felt it and when you've pushed something down, there's a real big charge to it. And for it to come up in the body, it is overwhelming. There's physiological things that go on, your heart, your sweating, your
Very much
body
so.
temperature. Like your system
Yes.
is really on hypervigilant alert, and that
Yes.
does not feel good. So, doing the energy healing, it removes that charge. So now you can see it without it alerting the system of, oh no, we can't look at this, we can't feel this. It's like,
Exactly.
no,
Exactly.
we can look at it. And it's a beautiful thing when there's something that used to supercharge you with either tears or anger, where you could have laughter. Like you can
Yes.
bring the humor to it and be less serious with it.
Exactly. Exactly. I've had a couple of times in my life since I've worked with energy where I've had to sit in a particular pattern or a particular emotional block it usually takes me about 3 weeks of deep immersion to release something that's been holding. I sat in shame for about 3 weeks.
Woo,
That was intense.
warrior
I
work.
sat, I sat in grief and terror and fear for about 3 weeks. Um, and when the fear came back at a later stage, it was more appropriate given the circumstances and it was more manageable. But I guess telling you the story, because we talk about, how do you face into your fears, immersion is the most effective way of doing that, where you don't hide from it. You feel the emotion, you dream about the emotion, you document your dreams, you talk about it, you're absolutely in it, but you're doing so from a place of love. You're pouring consciousness and loving attention onto that thing. And eventually it dissipates. And when you pop out, you feel that relief and release. And as I said, we've said over and over again, when you are triggered again, you never go back to the intensity of that. You process it in a very different way. I highly recommend to people, dedicating periods of time to working through and processing these things and sitting in it as long as you need to. When it came to anger, I released it within 30 minutes, but it was the most intense 30 minutes of my life. I felt like I wanted to jump out of my skin. I was actually on call to one of my mentors and they had to talk me off the ledge metaphorically because it was so uncomfortable to go off the physiology of it. It was rage coming to the surface to be released. And thankfully, it took 30 minutes to release a lifetime's worth of rage. But the experience was very intense. I had to breathe my way through it. I had to go out into my garden and sit in sunlight. It was pretty intense. So yeah, but I think it's really thrilling and exciting when you look back.
It is. And seeing the capacity of what our biology can go through and really like it's really priming the mind that you have the capacity, yet allow yourself the space and be with people that can hold space also. So they can empower you to remind you, what you are committed to and that you're not alone and that you have that safety also.
Yes,
I want to bring
exactly.
you into a reflective question. I want to ask you to bring your awareness right now and go back to your 18-year-old self. And you have 3 words to tell your 18-year-old self to carry you through the journey. What would those 3 words be?
You are safe. You are safe. When I was 18 and I was in my first year of university, I was wild. I was running wild. And so I would actually, and it was because I felt so unsafe. I would say, you are safe. Those would be my 3 words. If you want 3 separate words, I can give you 3
that's
separate.
good. No,
You are safe.
it's exactly what needs to come out. Now, I know from our discussion, people are wondering, where can I find Gabrielle and where can I access her? Can you let the listeners know how they can get in touch with you or where to find your resources?
Well, a lot of my resources you will find on my website. My company's name is Generative Growth, so generativegrowth.com.au, because I live in Australia. You'll see I've got a 20-minute downloadable masterclass on how to access your future self. It's a bit of time travel. It's beautiful. It's great for manifestation. And there are also different other things that there's, all my podcasts are there. There's some interesting resources. Otherwise connect with me on Instagram, Gabrielle.Pimstone. I'm very responsive. I'm in constant DM dialogue with my followers, and I'll do the same for you.
And for the listeners, I'll have that all in the show notes so that it's clickable so that you can get in contact with Gabrielle. I am thoroughly thankful that the intention was served because it was very heart-centered and very open. This was a very delicious conversation. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Natalie, thank you so much for being a podcast host and just having these kinds of platforms to get people's messages out, and for being such an incredible podcast host over and above that. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And I want to leave you with thank you for doing the alchemy in your life, taking the impurities and turning it into gold. And you're offering that to other people so that they don't have to go through the ways that you had to. You're shortening the ways for them to really get back into joy and feeling life. So thank you for that alchemy.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for saying that as well. It's my greatest gift.
Please remember to be kind to yourself. Hey, you made it all the way here. I appreciate you and your time. If you found value in this conversation, please share it out. If there was somebody that popped into your mind, take action and share it out with them. It possibly may not be them that will benefit. It's that they know somebody that will benefit from listening to this conversation. So please take action and share out the podcast. You can find us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok under Lift Oneself. And if you want to inquire about the work that I do and the services that I provide to people, come over on my website, come into a discovery call, liftoneself.com. Until next time, please remember to be kind and gentle with yourself. You matter.